The transfer order came through during lunch break, and David Chun almost choked on his sandwich when he read it. Prisoner 847. Maximum Security Wing. Solo guard duty starting tomorrow. He had only been on Cold Forge Station for 3 weeks, barely enough time to learn where the good vending machines were, and now they were throwing him into the deep end. His supervisor, a gruff woman named Patricia Wells, didn't offer much comfort when he asked about the assignment. She just looked at him with tired eyes and said the previous guard had requested an immediate transfer. No explanation, no details, just gone. David spent that evening reading through the briefing materials, which were frustratingly thin. Prisoner 847 was classified as extremely dangerous. Species, Dracker. Height, 9 feet. Weight, unknown. Offense, redacted. Trial date, pending. The file had more black bars than actual information, like someone had taken a marker to anything useful that he barely slept that night. His small quarters felt even smaller as he lay there wondering what kind of creature required a solo guard in a wing that apparently scared off experienced officers. David had joined station security because he believed in order, in protecting people, in making sure the chaos that killed his brother never happened to anyone else. Pirates had ambushed a transport near Jupiter, and the authorities had ignored multiple warnings because rerouting ships would cost the mining companies money. His brother had been on that transport. The next morning, David walked through the winding corridors of Cold Forge toward the Special Containment Wing. The station was enormous, an ugly gray wheel spinning in space between the outer colonies and the frontier worlds. It housed over 3,000 prisoners from dozens of species, all the beings that the Galactic Concordance had deemed threats to peace and order. The special wing was quieter than the main blocks. His footsteps echoed on the metal floor. Emergency lights cast everything in a dim blue glow. David noticed that the other cells in this section were empty, doors standing open on dark rooms. Only one cell at the end of the corridor showed active containment fields, a shimmer of energy visible even from a distance that he approached slowly, his hand instinctively checking the weapon at his hip. The briefing had been clear about one thing. Do not interact with the prisoner beyond basic security protocols. No conversation. No questions. Just watch and report. Then he saw her. The cell was massive, 3 times larger than standard containment units, with transparent walls that let him see everything inside. And there she was, Raza, though he didn't know her name yet. She was enormous, her body covered in deep crimson scales that seemed to absorb the blue emergency lighting and turn it into something warmer. Her wings were bound against her back by crackling energy shackles that hummed with power. More shackles circled her wrists and ankles, keeping her movements limited to a small area in the center of the cell. She was sitting when he arrived, her long tail curled around her legs, her head bowed. But the moment his boots hit the floor near her cell, her head lifted. Her eyes were gold, bright and aware, and they locked onto him with an intensity that made David freeze. He had expected a monster. The file said dangerous. His imagination had supplied the rest, some snarling beast that would throw itself against the walls and scream threats. But Raza just looked at him with those golden eyes, studying him like he was the curiosity, not her. David swallowed hard and moved to the guard station, a small desk with monitors and controls positioned to give him a clear view of the entire cell. He sat down, tried to ignore the way his hands shook slightly as he logged into the system. The first hour passed in silence. Raza didn't move much, just shifted occasionally, the energy shackles sparking whenever she did. David tried to focus on the monitors, on the security feeds from other parts of the station, on anything except the prisoner. But his eyes kept drifting back to her. There was something wrong about the whole setup. The shackles seemed excessive for someone who wasn't fighting them. The cell temperature controls were set for high heat, which made sense for a species that probably came from a warm world, but the humidity was turned down so low it had to be uncomfortable. And why was she alone in this entire wing? Why were all the other cells empty? Around hour 3, David made the mistake of really looking at her face. She had been watching him the whole time, he realized, not with aggression or hatred, but with something else, something that looked almost like exhaustion. Her scales, beautiful as they were, seemed dull in places. Her wings, even bound as they were, showed signs of stress in their membranes. She looked like someone who had been in that cell for a very long time. David pulled up her file again, searching for a capture date. He found it buried in a submenu. 3 years. She had been here for 3 years. And her trial status still said pending. His stomach turned. 3 years without a trial? That couldn't be right. The Concordance had laws about this kind of thing, didn't they? Protections for prisoners? He started to dig deeper into the file, but a warning message popped up. Unauthorized access attempt. Further attempts will be reported to Commander Hale. David closed the file quickly, his heart racing. He glanced at Raza and found her still watching him. Did she know what he had been trying to do? Could she even understand what the monitors were showing? The rest of his shift crawled by. 12 hours of sitting in that chair, watching a prisoner who never spoke, never attacked, never did anything that justified the level of security around her. When his relief finally arrived, a nervous young officer named Stevens who wouldn't meet his eyes, David almost ran from the wing. But as he reached the door, he heard something. A voice, deep and resonant, speaking a single word that the corridor's automated translation system picked up and rendered in his earpiece. Human. David turned, but Raza had her head bowed again, motionless. Stevens was already settling into the guard station, oblivious. David stood there for a long moment, wondering if he had imagined it. He hadn't. Sleep refused to come that night. David lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling panels, that single word echoing in his mind. Human. Why had she spoken? What did it mean? The regulations were clear about prisoner communication. He should report it, fill out the proper forms, let the chain of command handle it. But something stopped him from reaching for his tablet to file the report. Maybe it was the look in her golden eyes. Maybe it was the way the file had threatened him for asking basic questions. Maybe it was just the memory of his brother, who had trusted the system right up until the moment it failed him. David returned to the special wing the next day with a knot in his stomach. Stevens left quickly, muttering something about the environmental controls making him dizzy. David suspected it was Raza herself that made the young officer uncomfortable. Something about her presence demanded attention, made you feel small in a way that had nothing to do with her physical size. Raza was standing this time, as much as the shackles allowed. Her wings twitched against their restraints, a motion that looked painful. David settled into his chair and tried to focus on his duties. Security sweep. Check restraint integrity. Monitor environmental systems. All routine tasks that should have kept his mind busy. They didn't got an hour into his shift, the lights flickered. Just for a second, barely noticeable. But in that second, several systems reset, including the translation array built into the cell's containment field. A light blinked on that David had never seen before. Active. The translator was listening now, set to convert Dracker speech into English and vice versa. IT had to be a glitch. David reached for the control panel to shut it down, to follow protocol. Then Raza spoke, her voice a low rumble that the translator rendered into clear words. Why do you guard me? David's hand froze over the controls. He should shut it down. He should ignore her. He should do a dozen things that weren't sitting here in stunned silence. I asked you a question, human. Her tone wasn't aggressive. If anything, she sounded curious, maybe even sad. Do you even know what I'm accused of doing? I'm not supposed to talk to you, David said, and immediately wanted to kick himself. That was talking to her, wasn't it? He had already crossed the line. They told you that. Raza shifted, her shackles sparking. They tell all the guards that. Most of them never speak to me anyway. They're too afraid. I'm not afraid, David said, then realized how stupid that sounded. Of course he was afraid. She was twice his size and clearly built for power, even restrained as she was. But Raza made a sound that might have been a laugh, dry and bitter. You should be afraid, human. But not of me. You should be afraid of the ones who put me here. David glanced at the monitors. No alarms. No one was watching this feed right now, as far as he could tell. The night shift always had fewer supervisors. What are you talking about? How long does your file say I have been in this cage? 3 years. And what does it say about my trial? David hesitated. Pending. Pending. Raza repeated the word like it was poison. I have been here for 3 years without charges. Without a lawyer. Without anyone who will listen to my voice. Do you know what that makes me, human? What? A ghost. Someone they want to forget exists. She moved closer to the transparent wall, her face coming into clearer view. There were scars on her scales, marks that looked like they had been left by the shackles themselves. I was a mediator for my people. When the Concordance came to claim the mineral rights on our colony world, I tried to negotiate. I tried to find peace. They call me a terrorist and put me here. David felt cold despite the warmth of the wing. That's not how the Concordance works. There are laws, protections, for humans, perhaps, for citizens of powerful worlds. But for species like mine, Raz's tail lashed, stopped short by the shackles. We are inconvenient. We are in the way of profits. So they make us disappear. I don't believe you, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had spent the last day unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this assignment. The empty wing, the redacted file, the way Commander Hale had warned him not to ask questions. Then look for yourself, Raza said. Search for information about the Drakkar, about what happened to our colony, about the protests that were labeled insurgency. You have access to public records, do you not? Why are you telling me this? Raza was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Because you looked at me yesterday like I was a person, not a monster, not a threat, a person. No guard has done that in 3 years. David stared at her, his mind racing. Even if what you're saying is true, what am I supposed to do about it? I'm just a guard. I know, and I'm asking too much. Forget I spoke. Raza turned away, moving back to the center of her cell. You have your duty. I understand that. Go back to watching your monitors, human. Pretend this conversation never happened. But David couldn't forget. Not for the rest of his shift, not when he returned to his quarters, not when he sat in the station cafeteria picking at food he couldn't taste. Raza's words had planted a seed of doubt that grew with every passing hour. He found himself in the station's public database that evening, searching for information on the Drakkar. What he found made his blood run cold. The Concordance had discovered massive deposits of rare elements on the Drakkar colony world. Mining corporations had filed claims. The Drakkar had protested, calling it a violation of their settlement rights. Those protests had turned into demonstrations. The demonstrations had been labeled terrorism. Dozens of Drakkar had been arrested. The official reports painted the Drakkar as violent extremists. But as David dug deeper, he found independent news sources, reports from witnesses that told a different story. Peaceful protesters fired upon by corporate security. Families forcibly relocated. Leaders arrested in the middle of the night. And one name kept appearing in the coverage. Raza, a mediator who had tried to negotiate. A voice for her people who had spoken too loudly. David leaned back from his tablet, his hands shaking. He thought about his brother, about how the system had failed him because profits mattered more than safety. He thought about Raza in that cell, trapped for 3 years without justice. He thought about what it meant to be a good person in a universe where rules protected the powerful and crushed everyone else. His next shift started in 6 hours. He needed to sleep, but instead, he kept reading, kept searching, kept pulling at the threads of a story that the Concordance wanted buried. That'd be why the time dawn cycle began on the station. David Chun had made a decision that would change everything. David's hands were sweating when he entered the special wing for his 3rd shift. He had spent the morning wrestling with himself, trying to convince himself that what he was planning was insane. He had a career here, a future. Security work paid well and kept him out of the dangerous mining operations that chewed up workers and spat out broken bodies. Why would he throw all that away? But every time he closed his eyes, he saw his brother's face, heard the official report that called his death an unfortunate accident, felt the rage that came with knowing the truth had been buried under corporate interests and bureaucratic convenience. Raza was sitting again when he arrived, but her head lifted immediately. Those golden eyes studied him, and David had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through him, could read every thought running through his mind. He sat at a station and pulled up the security logs, making a show of checking the routine systems. Then quietly he spoke. I looked into it. What you said about your people. Raza didn't move, but he felt her attention sharpen. And you were telling the truth. David kept his eyes on the monitors, but his jaw was tight. They labeled peaceful protests as terrorism, arrested people without trials, made your entire species disappear from the public record. Now you understand. I understand that the system I believed in is broken. David finally looked at her. But understanding doesn't fix anything. What am I supposed to do with this information? Nothing, Raza said, and there was no bitterness in her voice now, only resignation. You have learned a hard truth, human. That is all. You cannot fight the entire Concordance. You cannot change what has already happened. Go back to your life and try to forget about the dragon woman in the cell. I can't do that. You must. I've been here 3 years. No one is coming to save me. No lawyer. No judge. No Hito. She shifted, her wings rustling against their restraints. I have accepted this. You should too. David stood up, moving closer to the transparent wall. Do you have family? Out there somewhere. Raza was silent for so long that David thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, a daughter. Saria. She was barely hatched when they took me. 3 years old by your counting. How old would she be now? 6. Still a child. Still learning to fly. Raza's voice cracked slightly. My sister cares for her. Tells her stories about me. But Saria does not remember my face. She does not remember my voice. I'm just a story to her now. The pain in those words hit David like a physical blow. He thought about being forgotten by the people you loved. About becoming nothing more than a ghost story. That's not right. None of this is right. Right and wrong mean nothing here, Raza said. Only power matters. The corporations have power. The concordance serves the corporations. And beings like me, like my people, we're just obstacles to be removed. David paced in front of the cell, his mind racing. There has to be something, some legal avenue, some way to get your case heard. I've had 3 years to think about this, human. There's no legal path. My file is sealed. My case is buried. The people who could help me will not risk their positions to do so. Raza moved closer to the wall, close enough that David could see the fine details of her scales, the scars left by years of confinement. But I thank you for caring. That is more than most have done. My name is David, he said suddenly. Not human. David Chun. Something changed in Raza's expression, a softening around her eyes. David, I am Raza, though I suppose you already knew that from the file. The file doesn't tell me anything real about you. No, files never do. Raza settled back, her tail curling. David Chun, why did you become a guard? What brought you to this place? David found himself talking, telling her about his brother, about the pirates, about the officials who had ignored warnings because profits mattered more than lives. He told her about his anger, his need to believe that there was order in the universe, that rules could protect people if they were enforced fairly. You and I are not so different, Raza said when he finished. We both believed in systems that failed us. We both lost people we loved to those systems. The difference is that you still have a choice. What do you mean? You can walk away. You can finish your shifts, collect your pay, and never think about me again. That is a choice I do not have. David stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised even himself. What if there was another choice? What if I could get you out of here? Raza went very still. That is not a thing you should say, even as a joke. I'm not joking. David's heart was pounding, but the words kept coming. I don't know how yet, but I'm not going to stand here and watch an innocent person rot in a cage while I convince myself I'm one of the good guys. That's not who I want to be. David, listen to me carefully. Raza's voice was urgent now. If you try to help me and fail, they will not just fire you. They will imprison you. They will destroy your life. You cannot risk that. My brother believed the system would protect him, David said quietly. He followed the rules. He trusted the authorities. And he died alone in space while the people who could have saved him counted their money. I won't make his mistake. I won't be complicit in this. Raza stared at him, and David saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Hope. Fragile and frightened, but real. You barely know me. Why would you risk everything? Because someone has to. David returned to his chair, but he felt different now. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe just committed to a path he couldn't turn back from. I need to think. I need a plan. But I promise you, Raza, I'm going to find a way. The rest of the shift passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the quiet of strangers, but the quiet of two people who had just become allies in something dangerous and necessary. When David left that evening, he stopped at the door and looked back. Raza was watching him, her wings held as high as the shackles would allow. A gesture that looked almost like a salute. David nodded once and stepped into the corridor. He had work to do, plans to make, and somewhere in this station, there had to be someone who could help him do the impossible. Finding help proved harder than David expected. Most of the guards on Cold Forge kept to themselves, did their jobs, and asked no questions. The smart ones, anyway. The ones who wanted to keep their positions and their clean records. David spent 2 days watching and listening before he approached anyone. He needed someone he could trust, someone who had enough access to help, but wasn't so invested in the system that they would report him immediately. The choice was risky no matter who he picked. He finally settled on Lynn Torres, a data analyst who worked in the station's central operations. David had met her during orientation, and she had struck him as someone who paid attention to details, who noticed when things didn't add up. More importantly, she had made a comment once about the Concordance's mining policies that suggested she wasn't blind to the corruption. David found her in the station's recreation area during off hours, sitting alone with a tablet and a cup of something that smelled like synthetic coffee. He slid into the seat across from her without invitation. Lynn looked up, startled. Chun, right? From security? David, can we talk? Somewhere private. She studied his face, and David watched her expression shift from surprise to caution. That depends. What is this about? Something I can't discuss here. Lynn glanced around the recreation area, noting the other officers scattered at various tables. There's a maintenance corridor near Sector 7. Cameras are down there for repairs. Meet me in 20 minutes. David nodded and left, his heart racing. This was the first real step. The moment he involved someone else, there was no taking it back. He could still change his mind, still walk away, still pretend he had never promised Raza anything. But he didn't point. 20 minutes later, David stood in a dim corridor that smelled like recycled air and old metal. Lynn appeared from the opposite direction, arms crossed, face wary. Talk, she said. And this better not be some weird romantic thing, because I am not interested. It's not. I need help with something. Something that could get us both fired. David took a breath. Or worse. Lynn's eyes narrowed. I am listening. David told her everything. About Raza. About the 3 years without trial. About the Drakkar colony and the corporate land grab and the way peaceful protests had been labeled terrorism. He told her about his brother and about the choice he had made to not be complicit anymore. When he finished, Lynn was quiet for a long time. Then she laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You want to break out a maximum security prisoner. Have I got that right? Yes. That's insane. I know. We would lose everything. I know that too. Lynn rubbed her face with both hands. Why are you telling me this? Why not just do it yourself? Because I can't, David admitted. Her shackles are biometrically locked. The security systems are too complex for one person to bypass. I need someone who understands the station's network. Someone who can create openings in the surveillance. Someone who can make us invisible long enough to get her out. And you thought of me. You're smart. You pay attention. And you once said something about the mining companies that made me think you might understand why this matters. Lynn stared at him. My brother works for one of those mining companies. He tells me things that don't make it into the official reports, about how they treat the non-human labor, about the accidents they cover up, about the ways they bend the law until it breaks. She shook her head. I've spent 2 years trying to ignore what I know, trying to convince myself that I'm just a data analyst, that it's not my problem. And now some idealistic security guard is asking me to commit career suicide for a prisoner I've never met. Lynn pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. Tell me about the containment wing, the layout, the security protocols. David felt a surge of relief, so strong it made him dizzy. You'll help. Someone has to stand up, Lynn said quietly. Might as well be us. But we need a real plan, David. Not just good intentions. A real, detailed, step-by-step plan that accounts for every variable. They spent the next hour going over everything David knew about the special wing. Lynn asked questions, made notes, and occasionally cursed under her breath at the level of security they would need to bypass. When they finally parted ways, she promised to look into the station's maintenance schedules and security rotations. We'll have one shot at this, she warned. If we fail, we go to prison. If we succeed, we're fugitives. Either way, our lives as we know them are over. I know, just making sure you've thought this through. David returned to his quarters, but didn't sleep. Instead, he sat on his bunk and stared at the wall, wondering if he was brave or just stupid. Maybe both. His brother had been neither. His brother had just been a good person who believed the rules would protect him. The next shift, David told Raza about Lynn, about the plan that was slowly taking shape. Raza listened in silence, her expression unreadable. You are risking everything for me, she said when he finished. Why? Because it's right. Right. Raza made that bitter laughing sound again. Do you know what happened to the last person who tried to help me? A guard named Patricia Wells. She asked too many questions about my case. Started filing requests for information. They transferred her off the station within a week. Sent her somewhere so remote she might as well have vanished. David felt cold. Wells. She was my supervisor when I first arrived. She looked so tired. She tried, David. She tried to do the right thing, and it destroyed her career. And she only asked questions. You are planning something far more dangerous. I don't care. You should. Raza moved closer to the wall, pressing one clawed hand against the transparent surface. But I am grateful. For 3 years, I have been invisible. A number in a file. A problem to be forgotten. You see me as a person. That alone is worth more than you know. David pressed his hand against the wall opposite hers, separated by the transparent barrier. I'm going to get you out of here, Raza. I'm going to get you back to your daughter. If we survive this, Raza said softly, you will always have a place among my people. I will make sure of that. Let's focus on surviving first. Over the next few days, Lynn worked her magic. She mapped the security systems, found weaknesses, identified a window during an upcoming maintenance cycle when monitoring would be reduced. She discovered that the shackles had a manual override that could be triggered from the security station during system resets. It was a narrow window, barely 30 seconds, but it was enough. They would need one more thing. An escape route. Lynn found it in the form of a supply shuttle scheduled to depart for a neutral trading station during the maintenance window. If they could get Raza onto that shuttle, if they could forge the right credentials, if everything went perfectly, they might actually pull this off. Too many ifs. But it was the best chance they had. David met with Lynn one last time before they set the plan in motion. Are you sure about this? He asked. No, Lynn said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. Tomorrow night. We free her, or we fail trying. Tomorrow night, David agreed, and hoped they would both still be alive to regret it. The maintenance cycle began at 20 to 100 hours, and David thought he might throw up from the nerves. He sat at the guard station in the special wing, watching the clock tick down, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Raza stood in her cell, silent and coiled like a spring, waiting for the signal. Lynn was positioned in the central operations room, her fingers ready on the keyboard. She had spent the last week building a false routine maintenance protocol that would give them the cover they needed. On paper, the special wing was getting a standard system check. In reality, they were about to commit the kind of crime that ended careers and lives. David's earpiece crackled. Lynn's voice, barely a whisper. We're going 5. The override window opens at 22:15. You'll have 30 seconds to release the shackles. Copy that. David whispered back, though his throat was so dry the words barely came out. The minutes crawled by like hours. David watched the cameras, watched the corridors, watched for any sign that someone had noticed something wrong. But the night shift was always understaffed, and Lynn had made sure that the supervisors were dealing with a minor emergency in another section. Nothing dangerous, just enough to keep them occupied. 22:15. The lights in the wing dimmed as the maintenance protocol kicked in. Alarms went silent. Cameras switched to backup mode, which Lynn had already corrupted. They had their window. David's hands flew over the controls, entering the override sequence Lynn had taught him. His heart hammered against his ribs. The system fought him for a moment, security protocols demanding confirmation he didn't have. Then Lynn did something from her end, and the barriers fell away. The shackles around Raza's wrists sparked and died. Then her ankles. Then the restraints holding her wings. She stumbled forward, free for the first time in 3 years, and David heard her make a sound that was half sob, half roar. Move, David said urgently, hitting the cell door release. We have maybe 10 minutes before someone notices. Raza burst from the cell, her wings spreading wide for one glorious moment before she folded them against her back. She was even more impressive outside the containment field, all coiled power and barely contain emotion. Where do we go? Follow me. Stay low. Try to make yourself small. Raza made a sound that might have been a laugh. I'm 9 feet tall. Small is not possible. But she tried, hunching her shoulders and moving as quietly as something her size could move. David led her through the maintenance corridors, using the route Lynn had mapped out. Every shadow made him jump. Every sound made his hand reach for his weapon. They were halfway to the cargo bay when they ran into Rodriguez. The senior guard stood in the corridor ahead, his weapon drawn, his eyes wide with shock. He had been walking his patrol route, completely unaware of the chaos he was about to stumble into. For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then Rodriguez's training kicked in, and he raised his weapon. Chin, what are you doing? Something I should have done the moment I learned the truth, David said, stepping between Rodriguez and Raza. She's innocent. They've buried her here to cover up corporate crimes. I'm getting her out. You're insane. Step aside before I shoot both of you. David didn't move. Behind him, Raza tensed, ready to fight or flee. David could feel the moment stretching, could see Rodriguez's finger on the trigger, could see his entire plan falling apart in this corridor. She has a daughter, David said desperately. A 6-year-old child who doesn't remember her mother's face. They took her away for speaking out against illegal mining operations. 3 years without trial. 3 years in that cell. Tell me that's justice. Rodriguez's weapon wavered. The system doesn't make mistakes like that. Yes, it does. You know it does. How many times have you seen files that don't make sense? Or does that feel wrong? How many times have you looked the other way because questioning things would cost you your job? David took a step forward. I'm not looking away anymore. I can't, and I don't think you want to either. If I let you go, I'm finished. If you stop us, you're just another tool of a corrupt system. Rodriguez stared at them both, his jaw working. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. I didn't see anything. You have 5 minutes before shift change. After that, I can't help you. Relief hit David so hard his knees almost buckled. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just go. Rodriguez turned away, walking back down the corridor without looking back. And Chun? I hope you make it. They ran. Through maintenance tunnels, past storage areas, down service ladders that groaned under Roz's weight. David's earpiece crackled constantly with Lynn's updates. Security teams were starting to respond to the missing prisoner alert. Commander Hale was on his way to the special wing. They had minutes left, maybe less. The cargo bay doors loomed ahead. David used his security override to open them, praying that Lynn's forged credentials would hold. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a chaotic space filled with containers and loading equipment. And there, on the far side, sat the supply shuttle. There, David gasped, pointing. That's our way out. They sprinted across the bay. Behind them, alarms finally started blaring. The station's security had figured out what was happening. Boots thundered in distant corridors. Voices shouted orders. David reached the shuttle first and slammed his hand on the access panel. The hatch opened. Raza scrambled inside, her wings scraping against the narrow entrance. David threw himself after her and hit the door control. The hatch was sliding closed when Commander Hale appeared in the cargo bay entrance, his face twisted with rage. Chun, stop right now, or I will have you shot. The only monsters here were uniforms, David shouted back, and the hatch sealed shut. He stumbled to the pilot's seat and fired up the engines. He had basic shuttle training, enough to get them away from the station. Enough to run. The shuttle lifted off, and David could see security officers scrambling, trying to seal the bay doors, try to trap them inside. Too late. The shuttle shot through the opening and into the black void of space. Behind them, Cold Forge Station hung like a gray wheel against the stars. Pursuit vessels were already launching, their lights bright against the darkness. But Raza leaned forward, her golden eyes scanning the space ahead, and began calling out coordinates in her native tongue that the shuttle's translator picked up. There, the asteroid field. I know these spaces. Follow my guidance. David gripped the controls and dove toward the tumbling rocks. Behind them, the security vessels followed, but they were too slow, too cautious. Raza navigated them through impossible gaps, past spinning debris, through a maze of stone and ice that only someone with her people's instincts could manage. When they finally broke clear on the other side, the security vessels were gone, lost in the field or forced to turn back. David engaged the faster-than-light drive, and reality bent around them as they jumped into the safety of deep space. In the quiet that followed, David and Raza looked at each other. She was free. He was a fugitive. Everything had changed. What do we do now? David asked. Raza's expression softened, something like hope lighting her golden eyes. Now we go home. The shuttle drifted through space for 2 days before they reached Theranos Station, a sprawling collection of modules and docking rings that floated in neutral territory, outside the reach of Concordance law. David had never been this far from regulated space. Everything felt different here, dangerous and free at the same time. Raza had been quiet during the journey, staring out the viewport at the stars. David caught her crying once, silent tears that she quickly wiped away. 3 years of imprisonment followed by escape. He couldn't imagine what she was feeling. When they docked, a Drakkar was waiting for them, smaller than Raza, with blue-green scales and cautious eyes. He introduced himself as Kale, a friend who had been helping refugees from the colony world. Raza embraced him, speaking rapidly in her own language, and David watched them both with a sense of being very far from home. Kale led them to a small apartment in the station's residential section. It wasn't much, but it had real beds and a food processor and windows that looked out at the stars. David collapsed onto a couch while Raza and Kale talked. He was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear for so long that now that they had stopped, he felt completely empty. His communicator buzzed. Lynn. David's hands shook as he opened the message. You made it. Thank God. Listen, things are crazy here. Commander Hale is losing his mind. But something else happened. Rodriguez came forward, testified about the corruption in the special wing. Other guards are backing him up. There's an investigation starting. People are asking questions about Raza and the other political prisoners. You might have started something, David. David stared at the message, hardly believing it. One act of defiance, and suddenly people were paying attention. He typed back quickly. Are you safe? For now. They can't prove I helped. But I'm watching my back. Take care of yourself. And tell Raza that people know her story now. That matters. David looked up to find Raza watching him. What is it? Things are changing. Back on the station. People are asking questions about you. About what happened to your people. Raza sat down beside him, her tail curling on the floor. Will it matter? I don't know. But it's more than there was before. Kale brought them food, some kind of protein that tasted better than anything David had eaten on Cold Forge. While they ate, Kale filled them in on news from the Drakkar colony world. The situation was still tense, but there were human advocates now, people speaking out against the forced relocations. The protests were growing. The Concordants couldn't ignore it forever. And Saria? Raza asked quietly. Kale smiled. She is well. Your sister has been caring for her. When I told them you were free, they wept. Raza, your daughter knows you did not abandon her. We made sure she understood that you were taken, not that you left. Raza closed her eyes, and David saw her wings tremble. When can I see her? Soon. But first, you need to decide what comes next. The Concordants will be looking for you. They cannot allow this escape to go unpunished. You need to choose whether to hide or to fight. David felt the weight of that choice. He was part of this now. Whatever Raza decided would affect his life too. He was a fugitive, a criminal in the eyes of the law. He could run forever, hiding in neutral stations and hoping he was never found. Or he could stand for something. His communicator buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. The story had broken. Major networks were covering the escape. But the angle was wrong. They were calling David a dangerous radical who had freed a terrorist. Raza was being painted as a monster. The truth was being buried again. They're lying about us, David said, showing Raza the report, making us look like the villains. Raza read it and sighed. Of course they are. This is how power works. They control the story. Then we change the story, David said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. We go public. We tell the truth. Your truth. What they did to you. What they did to your people. We make them listen. That would mean giving up any chance of hiding, Kale warned. The Concordants would find you. They're going to find us anyway, David said. But if we tell our story first, if we make people understand what really happened, maybe it will matter. Maybe it will change things. Raza studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her clawed hand over his, a gesture that felt significant in ways David didn't fully understand. You have given me back my freedom, David Chun. You have given me hope of seeing my daughter again. If you believe this is the right path, then I will walk it with you. Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. They recorded testimony, shared documents, reached out to independent journalists who were willing to listen. Raza told her story, calm and clear, about being a mediator who spoke for peace and was imprisoned for it. David told his story about discovering the truth and choosing conscience over career. The response was bigger than either of them expected. Human citizens, upon hearing the full story, were outraged. Protests erupted on Earth and the colony worlds. The Concordants tried to maintain their narrative, but too many people were paying attention now. Too many voices demanding answers. Commander Hale was arrested. The investigation expanded. Other political prisoners were found, their cases just as corrupt as Raza's. The system David had believed in was being forced to look at itself, and what it saw was ugly. 3 months after the escape, David received a message from an unexpected source. The Concordance Justice Department. They were offering him immunity in exchange for his testimony in the corruption trials. Raza received a similar message. All charges dropped. A formal apology. A promise of reform. Do you trust them? Raza asked. No, David said honestly. But I think we changed enough that they have to at least pretend to be better. That's something. They traveled to the Drakkar colony world together. David met Raza's sister, saw the crystal caves and the vast open skies. And he met Saria, who was shy at first, hiding behind her aunt. But when Raza knelt down and spoke softly in their language, the young Drakkar slowly approached. She touched her mother's face with small clawed hands, and then she buried herself in Raza's arms. David turned away, giving them privacy, and found himself staring at the horizon. The sky was filled with flying Drakkar, their wings catching the light. He had thrown away his career, his safety, his entire future for this moment. For the sight of a mother reunited with her child. For the chance that maybe things could be better. A hand touched his shoulder. Raza stood beside him, Saria perched on her back, curious eyes watching the strange human. The elders have decided, Raza said. You are to be named Flamekin, one of our people. You will always have a place here. I'm honored, David said, and meant it. What will you do now? Raza asked. The immunity offer stands. You could return to your people, start a new life. David thought about going back to human space, to a world that felt smaller now. Or he could stay here, in this place where he had found something he had been missing. Purpose, connection, a sense that what he did mattered. I think, David said slowly, I'd like to help more people. There are other political prisoners out there. Other people like you who need someone to stand up for them. Maybe I could do something about that. Raza's smile was fierce and proud. Then you will need allies. And you have them. 6 months later, David stood in front of the Concordance Council, testifying in the trials that would reshape the justice system. He had become an advocate, working with organizations dedicated to protecting the rights of non-human species. Lynn had joined him, using her skills to expose corruption wherever they found it. Rodriguez had also come forward, training new guards in ethical practices. The system was far from fixed. There was still corruption, still inequality, still powerful interests that care more about profits than people. But there were also people fighting back now. People who had found the courage to stand up. David returned to the Drakkar colony often. He watched Saria grow, learned their language, participated in their ceremonies. He had lost his old life, but he had gained something more valuable. He had gained purpose. One evening, sitting with Raza on a cliff overlooking the crystal caves, she asked him if he regretted his choice. No, David said without hesitation. Doing the right thing cost me everything, but it gave me something too. It gave me the ability to look at myself and be proud of what I see. Raza spread her wings. In the fading light, they glowed like fire. You freed one prisoner, David Shun, but your courage freed thousands. That is not a small thing. Neither is what you did. You stood up for your people when it would have been easier to stay silent. You survived 3 years because you refused to break. That's not a small thing either. They sat together as the sun set, human and Drakkar, watching the sky dancers trace patterns in the air. The universe was still broken in many ways, but it was also filled with people trying to fix it. And that, David thought, was enough to give him hope.